Anyway, welcome again, and I'm Steve Morris. I'm a longtime Jamboree person. This 50-year patch I got 7 years ago. So I know some of these rocks rather well. Have names for a few of them also, but we won't talk about that. What I'd like to do here this morning is to give you an impression of what this is all about, how I want you to feel about it, because it's very important. And to make it simple right here quick, I do this so that you will have a different feeling of Rubicon Trail, not just a place to come and wreck your Jeep. This is the place to enjoy history and nature, and it's a wonderful place. I do kind of a random talk. I don't have a prepared script. I just use my head and I forget things, and then I remember them later, so don't expect it to be totally in sync. I'll say I believe that on this chopper is Mark Smith, who was one of the originators of the Jeepers Jamboree. Okay, this trail was first traveled by a Caucasian in 1844, so this is nothing new. It was traveled by the Townsend party that came through on horseback in 1844. They broke off from a wagon train near Reno, and the wagon train went on over Donner, and they came this way. And this is the pass that is over here, is the lowest elevated pass in the Sierra. And so it was very popular with the ones who were not taking wagons and bigger equipment at that time. But it was not used a whole lot until the gold rush days and the silver rush, the Comstock load. And the advantage of this trail was traffic. We think we have traffic on US 50 today. It's nothing like it was in the Virginia City gold rush and silver mining days. What we call US 50 today was nose to tail or nose to tailgate wagons, horses, teams, pack mules, everything. And it was so solid that there are stories that if you fell out of line, you might have to hang around for a couple of weeks to get back in. And I will clear up another little thing. I have Speaker of the House boners problem. I get emotional, so I apologize for that, but it's just a fact of life. I've passed around 2 books. The blue one is a list of the people that stayed in the Rubicon Springs Hotel within that certain date period, and it's very interesting. They are not alphabetical, but in the book that my son produced, they are alphabetical, so they're much easier to trace your relatives there. The other book is a black book binder that has a collection of pictures that will move around, and you can have a look at those. I'll pass also these pictures. Put one on this table. Give one to the other table, and I'll pass one over here. Run it down that table there. Very good.
A lot of the black book pictures in your son's book too?
Yes. All right. The Hunsucker brothers were the first settlers in here, and George Hunsucker is the most well-known of them, and his picture is in the book here also. And they established what they called a stopping station. There was so much traffic with burros and foot travel through here of people who chose to come this way than to fight the traffic on what we call US 50 today. And their route was, most of them were going from the Coloma, Georgetown area to Virginia City. So they would travel up the trail here, hit the lake at McKinney's, get on a boat and go across the lake, and then go back traveling over Spooner Pass down to Carson City and Virginia City. And there was traffic both directions, of course. And then the Hunsucker brothers discovered the mineral springs here. And there's a lot of confusion in people's minds about these springs. These are not hot springs that you get in and take a bath. This is what you drink to cure everything that ails you. And in the advertisements of the hotel and the resort here, as it developed, and the Hunsucker brothers were the first ones to figure out that this mineral spring water was really valuable. They actually bottled it and hauled it out. They started doing that, and it was sold in the bars all around in the Tahoe area and clear down in Georgetown. And their slogan was, "Have a drink, better than whiskey." And if you would like to try the mineral water, there's a spring over on the left side here. Well, you can see a bunch of people standing there. You'll see a kind of a drainage water coming off of there, and if you go up, there's a board over the spring. You lift it, it's very clean. Dip your cup gently in there and taste it. It's really quite good. The other main spring is to the right of the trail going out, and that is where I believe they did the most bottling of the water. There's a picture in the book here of probably 100 people standing around and a bunch of crates for bottles, etc. So it became a pretty significant business. The Hunsucker brothers eventually sold the property, and let's say the one who owned and operated the hotel the most was Sierra Nevada Phillips. And if you recognize the name Phillips on Highway 50, that's where her father established the Phillips station. She was the daughter of Phillips there, and she operated the hotel. She's the one that built the hotel here. And the hotel was right where our caretaker's cabin is today. And if you look behind it there, maybe some trailers and Jeeps parked in there, but you can see a row of foundation stones still there. When I was first in here in 1947, the hotel was still standing in really quite good condition. If somebody had bothered to maintain it, it would still be here today. It was a three-story hotel. The third floor was in the attic where you had the sloped roof. And I'll go back to the story of how I got here, and then I'll tell you about the hotel some more. I drove a 1939 Dodge, 6-cylinder, 3-speed, 2-wheel drive pickup from Lake Tahoe as far as the bridge. And coming this direction was no problem at all. Even had little city street tires on it, and they were half worn out. And we got to the bridge, no trouble at all. I was just a dumb kid and had 2 friends with me. We were actually in the Sea Scout program at that time. Was a skipper and the first and second mate. I was a second mate. But anyway, we got to the bridge and stopped to have lunch. And while we were sitting there having lunch, a brand new Willis Jeep pickup came by. And this was right after World War II, and this was the first production of civilian units. And this gentleman stopped and was talking with us, and he wanted to know where we were headed. Oh, we said, we're going on to Georgetown. He looked at it and he says, really? So anyway, he invited us to climb on the back of his pickup and ride a little ways and see if we wanted to go on. Well, we crossed the bridge, and we hadn't gone 100 yards, and I knew we weren't going any farther. But I sat in the back of that pickup, and I looked out, and I watched those tires walk over the rocks, and I says, I've got to have one. It took a while. It was not till about 1952 I finally got a Jeep. But the story goes from there downhill, but literally uphill. So we decided we couldn't go on through, so we had to turn around. No big deal. We were prepared. we had tire chains, we had a block and tackle, so we were in good shape. Got back to cross Miller Creek, which was about as wide as this table at that time, but it had a little bank to it on both sides. Dropped in, went through. The old city tires, they just spun on the mud on the other side. He wouldn't climb the bank and get out of there. So, okay, we'll back up and put the tire chains on, which we did. Then it didn't have power enough to pull out with the tire chains. So we had to use a block and tackle to get over an 18-inch bump. Then the fun began. We started uphill, and it just didn't have enough power to pull up that hill. It wasn't a matter of traction. It wouldn't, if I'd had four-wheel drive, it wouldn't have made any difference. It was just straight power. If some of your older guys are familiar with the old flathead Dodge 6s, they had a tendency to die in the altitude. They lost about half of their horsepower. So I even took off the air cleaner to try to get a little more air into it. And I would rev it up to where you'd think it was going to come apart and try to let the clutch out, and that was it. It wouldn't go. So we'd hook the block and tackle on, get it in motion, and they'd pull the hook off the bumper and I'd just go for everything I could get out of it. And passing the graves, where you see the graves today, the road now, or the trail, goes to the left and up over a slab of rock. That's a bypass. That's an old a change. That's not part of the original road. Original road, you went straightaways and made just a typical switchback and turned left. And if you look out there now, you can see where that road did come up there. And I got it turned and got running up there, actually made it around the second switchback, and it died. And that was it. My buddies were clear down the bottom with a block and tackle yet. They were having lugged that. And if you don't know what a block and tackle is, it's about 200 feet of rope wrapped around a whole bunch of pulleys, and it weighs a lot. But it's quite effective because we didn't have winches. So anyway, they were on their way up to we'd hook up again and see if we can get it moving. And along coming down was a surplus military command car. And he was, I'd say about half my age, but he was an older man to me then. But he was very unhappy. He said, "What are you dumb kids doing in here with that piece of junk?" And if he could have got around us, he'd have just left us, but there was no way to get around us. So he did pull us back to the white spot, got off, and you're on your own. But we had to get out the block and tackle again and work our way up. Got to the last grade on the way out. The ones who I've taken to jail before, you probably know what I'm talking about. But the road was actually relatively smooth through that level area and up that last grade. And I would get back on that level area and get that old Dodge wound up as tight as it would go, first gear, and run for that hill. On the fifth try, I just inched over. From there on out, it was a car road in those days. So, and there was actually a sign at that point on the way in that said the percent of grade, and it was rather steep, and four-wheel drive advised. We ignored it, of course. I passed a picture around, and as I indicated in the first place, there may not be continuity to what the subjects are, but it's kind of rambling on my part. I don't like to follow a written script of any kind. There's a picture going around which I hope all of you have seen. This is a recreation of the stagecoach that ran from McKinney's to here on a daily basis. The actual original stagecoach is in Mark Smith's museum in Georgetown. He and Greg were down in Amador County one day, and I think it was Fiddletown, and they saw this stagecoach sitting in a barn there that had the name on it of that time, and so they bought it and restored it, and they have it in a glass case there in Georgetown. It's worth seeing. And that stagecoach did make a daily run in here every day from McKinney's. Now McKinney's has changed its name along the way to Chambers Lodge. That's the old McKinney's. And that was the main boat dock on that side, this side of the lake. In those days, people that wanted to come to Rubicon Springs, and probably the majority were out of San Francisco, Sacramento, the Bay Area, and they would get on a train in Oakland, and on a sleeper, an overnighter, get off at Truckee, get on a stagecoach to Tahoe City, and then change another one to come to McKinney's, and then get on this stagecoach to come to Rubicon Springs. It was quite a trip. In the later days, the railroad got put in between Truckee and Tahoe City, and so that made it a little bit easier. They'd take the train up to Truckee, then train to Tahoe City, and in those days the train at Tahoe City actually ran right out on the pier. They had a pier for the train. You could get right off the train and on the boat and go to McKinney's. And the main means of travel around Lake Tahoe was by boat in those days. There was docks all around, and there was probably half a dozen steamboats running at the same time on Tahoe. And that's another history that's worth looking into if you like boats. All right. In a lot of the literature, the hotel, they advertised quite a bit in the Bay Area papers and Sacramento papers, and people came from all over the world actually, but the majority were from the Sacramento, the Bay Area, and down the valley. In those days, there was a condition called valley fever that many people got in the valley in the summertime. We don't know even today probably what caused it, some kind of dust or pollen or whatever. Might have just been hay fever, but it was typical for the ones who could afford it to bring their families to the high elevation, to the mountains in the summertime, and then the men went back and worked in there on the farms, etc., and then came back in the fall and brought people back out. And the rates for like staying at the Rubicon Springs Hotel, I believe it changes with management, but it was in the $2 to $3 range for room and board per day. Now that sounds very, very cheap. So I want to give you a little perspective on that. In 1922, annual income was $1,201. You could buy a new Maxwell touring car for $885, or an Overland auto, which preceded the Jeep, $550. A living room set, 3-piece, $124. Men's Oxford shoes, $1.95. Milk, 10 cans for $1, that can milk. Women's handbag, $1. Butter, 43 cents a pound. Bacon, 45 cents a pound. And so it gives you a different perspective on it. $2.50 was a lot of money in those days. Today it's throwaway money. So when we look at those room and board prices, it really wasn't the bargain that it sounds like. And in that same year, in 1920, just 22 for interest, A&W Root Beer was founded. Eskimo pies were first on the market. Better Homes and Garden magazine started. State Farm Insurance started. True Confessions magazine started. Let's see. How about some questions to jog my memory here? But there's a Cadillac Hill. Over the years, and there's many pictures of the old Cadillac on the hill that got abandoned there. And that's how the hill got its name. In the book there is a story that talks about some people that, it was in the mid-30s, they were coming through in a Chevrolet that broke an axle, and they had tried many times, but they broke an axle that year again, but they hiked out, got a new axle and fixed it and got on through. And they made a comment in their story, there's an old Cadillac trying that they don't think is going to make it. So that may be the Cadillac that's on the hill. We can't prove that at this point, but I think it kind of fits. The old Cadillac, the remains of it are still there. They're a little hard to find. After you make the switchback turn going up Cadillac, if you look off to the right in the brush, you can see a fender and piece of the frame, etc. And a few years ago, or in fact many years ago, there was a rumor floating around that it was really a LaSalle, not a Cadillac. Well, I said, okay, LaSalle was built by Cadillac, a model of Cadillac, so what? It's still Cadillac. But then I decided I wanted to lay that to rest, prove that it was either a LaSalle or a Cadillac. So I'm a little bit of a car buff, and I have a catalog that's about 8 inches thick that covers the specs of all the cars ever built in the United States up to World War II. And we already knew from the pictures that this vehicle was in the range of 28, 29 in its vintage. So I was able to establish that all of the LaSalles built in that time were 134-inch wheelbase. All the Cadillacs that were built at that time were 140-inch wheelbase. So I knew that the frame and axles were still there. So Doug Barr was generous to come in with me on a special trip, and we dug out enough so that I could measure the wheelbase. It is a Cadillac. I've actually 3 questions that on the field or on the floor right now, but I'm going to take the easiest one first. When I was giving you the comparative prices, I missed the gasoline. It was 25 cents a gallon in 1922. The next question was about the graves that you see on the way out. Along with that, how many first-timers are we here that had never been out on the trail before? Okay, so you don't even know about the graves, but welcome. On your way out, on your right side, just before you start climbing the hill, you'll see what looks like a little graveyard. It's memorial stuff for people who have loved this area and who have passed away, and their friends wanted to make sure that they stayed in touch with the Rubicon area. Anyway, that's what it's all about. There's even a monument there to a dog, and I do believe that the dog might actually be buried there. But to my best of my understanding, there are no human remains there, except there might be some ashes that nobody's told us about. But and I don't know that for a fact, but it's a possibility. Okay, the other question was one a subject that I missed in my beginning. Think about this in the terms of the Native Americans that we call them today. This was a paradise for the Indians. We had the Miwoks, the Paiutes, and there's another tribe I'm forgetting, brain fade. Washos, thank you. Anyway, this had to be a paradise for them. Water, beautiful weather, game, all of these things. And if you look in front of where the caretaker's cabin is, on the rock that's across the road from there, you'll find the grinding holes from the Indians. And also along with it is a geological survey benchmark. If you don't know what that is, it's a brass plate that is set in the rock that establishes the altitude and the geographical measurements that establish the point of survey. So anyway, the grinding holes are there, and they're of course interesting. But the Indians had to just really enjoy this. There's been many, many arrowheads found in here, and there's still, I'm sure, hundreds more. And there is some talk at various times that I've heard that, I'm getting a feedback there or something. Oh, is that okay? All right. Anyway, there's a possibility that there was competition between these tribes about who was going to be here in the particular time. And that may account for the abundance of arrowheads. And those were the ones that weren't fatal. Would you like, can you bribe me? No, don't bribe me. But prime me on any other subject on the Indians that you wanted?
How, that was 3,000, 4,000 years?
10,000, we don't know. This goes back forever. And so it evolved with the whatever the tribes were at the times. And I don't have any information of that type. We do know also that Sierra Nevada Phillips, who operated the hotel here, did employ Native Americans as workers around here. But one of the advertisements that we found of hers, or Rick found, no, I beg your pardon, it was Mark Smith that came up with this ad and gave it to us. That the ad for the report, and at the bottom there was a small line that said, "We employ white help." But I'm thinking that was the hotel help, the dining room help, all of that. But I don't know. It was just a comment that showed up in this ad that we thought was rather strange.
There's some petroglyphs down the way too. There's some petroglyphs down the way too.
I don't even know about that.
I'll show you.
I'm just being informed that there's some petroglyphs here that I don't know about. So that's great. I'll have to have you show me where they are. There's a geology talk going on right now also at another location, but there's one thing I'd like to share with you that you might find interesting. Up on the trail going out, when it turns left just right out of camp here, if you turn right instead and go way up in the highest point before the cliffs, you'll find a hole in the rock probably 12 inches in diameter that appears at a glance that it was done with a drill, and it's about 4.5 feet deep, but it's actually an erosion through the ice ages and the melting of the glaciers, and of course you see the glacier strata all over here. But it's just really fascinating that this hole is just so perfect that it looks just like it was drilled with a mechanical drill. All right, now I got to find out where I was. Give me another question.
The hotels, this one in Wentworth, were they more thoroughfare traffic, or were they people staying for weeks or summers?
The question is, were the hotels here and at Winter Springs destination hotels or travel hotels? I would say that it was a combination of both, but I would say mostly destination. People came to the Mineral Springs resorts for the cure. And the advertisements of the hotel here gave a list of everything it would cure. And I think it covered the field. Almost anything could ail you. And in one of the advertisements, that list, the bottom item on it, and this one I haven't figured out yet, but it says it will cure constipation permanently. That one I haven't really figured out.
So that water is safe to drink out of the...
Yes, it is safe to drink out of the springs, just like it was then. It's coming from deep out of the ground. The two springs right here, and then the third one way back that is about a mile high.
Stone cabin.
What's the history
Okay.
behind the stone cabin?
Very, very good. Is he landing or just passing over? Anyway, all right, the stone cabin. See what I can get in about that. Back on, if you've noticed the sign at the beginning of the property, it shows like a half section, and then with a little leg off, it's in the shape of an L, the property that the group owns here. And back on this 80-acre leg, there is a stone cabin. This was built in the mid-30s at the time the dam was being built on Buck Island Lake. We have two questions on the floor, and they're related. The stone cabin is on the 80-acre leg of our property. The rest of it is a half section, which is 320. So we have the group that owns this property has 400 acres, and it's prime property for you to come. And I'll fill in on that as well. When this was purchased back in 1985, so we've had it, the group has had it for quite a while. Our purpose in buying it was to keep this land in private hands so you could come. So there was a place. The stone cabin, which is out on the 80, was built in the mid-30s. We don't know the exact year. It probably could be researched, but I don't have it at this time. But it was built by a guy that was working on the building of the dam at Buck Island. And in his spare time or his weekends off, he came down here and built this cabin. Probably didn't even consider who owned the property or not. And he built it and stayed in it while he worked on the dam. When that was over, his family kept coming in, using it as a vacation place. When the group bought the property, the family of the guy that built it thought they owned that land, but they never did. It was just squatter, and that doesn't sound nice. They're nice people, but it just didn't work. They either had to have a contract or some means of relationship with the true property owners, and so they have not been back since we bought the property. Interesting about the cabin also ties in with the old hotel. They actually had running water, good drinking water, at the hotel. For the curing purposes, people drank the spring water, the mineral spring water. But the domestic water was actually piped into the hotel. There's a spring about 10 miles up the mountain, off of the 80 there. I was up there once. I'm never going again.
Is that where the pipe from the stone cabin goes?
Right.
We followed that for a couple of miles.
Yeah. You'll find around the stone cabin some pipes and even a faucet right in front of the stone cabin. So anyway, the guy that built the stone cabin, or his family, they figured out where the hotel was getting their water. And it wasn't too hard, because there was several pipelines up there, because they would not get it drained perfectly in the wintertime, and so it would break the pipes. So almost every year probably they had to run some new pipes or repair. So they followed the pipes up and they found the input spot where and I don't know what the method of turning it on or off at that point was, but they learned how to make the water come down the pipe, and so they cut in and put a spigot right there at the stone cabin, and they tapped into the old hotel water system. But it did have running water. It also had electric lights at later stage. If you notice over here behind this row of trailers, they've got it blocked pretty well, but there is an old Pelton wheel. I hope some of you know what a Pelton wheel is. Anyway, for those who don't, it's a water motor. It's a means of turning water power into whatever else you want it. And Pelton designed this wheel. He may be coming in again, but anyway, Pelton designed the wheel to get better use of the power of the water. The older wheels were more like paddle wheels, and the water, it worked, but it didn't get the full power out of the water. I'll get back on this. The earlier water wheels were just like a flat paddle, but Pelton figured out that if he made those into cups, bye. Anyway, the Pelton designed instead of a paddle, he created a pair of cups with a sharp ridge separation in the middle, so that when the water from the source of the pipe went through, it hit that pair of cups, it actually split and returned on itself, which created quite a bit more power onto the wheel. Then this wheel that we have here was one of a version that he partnered with another guy that came up with an invention to even increase the efficiency of the Pelton wheel. The original Pelton wheels, the back was flat, so that when it went through the circle, the water that was at the bottom, it got a lot of resistance in that water. So this one has the back of the cups rounded just like the front, so that it reduced the resistance going through. And that's the most efficient Pelton wheel design that I know of. And the Pelton wheel is still used around the world and is still being manufactured because it is so efficient to produce power where you don't have, or it doesn't have to just produce electricity. Like in this case, you'll see the water motor portion, the big flywheel, and then on the other end it's like a hub on your Jeep, where it would have had a pulley and a belt that would have gone to a generator. And there was electric lights in the hotel and actually across the river also. There were a group of tent cabins on the other side of the river. They had a cable bridge to walk across to that area, and there's evidence of the electricity being over there also. And if you go over there, you can find trails outlined with little rocks that went between the tent cabins, and that's clear evidence that they were there. Get me sidetracked here. Okay. Any more questions right now?
Jeepers Jamboree, were you on the first one, or how were the very beginning? What was the beginning of Jeepers Jamboree 60 years ago?
The Jeepers Jamboree, the question is the history of the Jeepers Jamboree in a sense. The Jeepers Jamboree, the first one was 1953. My first one was 55. I missed the first two and one later on. I've only missed three. The first one I was on, which was 1955, in those days they passed out a certificate at the end that you said you survived the Jeepers Jamboree. It was run considerably different. We all left Georgetown in groups of 10 with a leader, and we were lucky to make Wentworth Springs by noon. Right out of Georgetown, the pavement died about 1.5 miles. Then it was like a foot of dust all the rest of the way. They always promised the water trucks, but we had trouble finding them. So by the time we got to Wentworth Springs, we were having trouble seeing. So the first thing was to go down to the creek and wash your eyes out. Then we would eat lunch at Wentworth, then come on and get in here in time for dinner. Then there was I can't think of the word. Anyway, a local entertainment, and it was really quite good. I enjoyed it. In fact, I liked it better than a rock and roll band. But I'm giving away my age. And anyway, my first time in here, the wall of one of the cabins that had fallen down was laid flat and made a stage, and that was the entertainment area, which was right over here where the kitchen area is now. And there were quite a few other cabins still standing, and one of them was being used as the bar, and it was called the Bucket of Blood. Then they were stopping us, and nobody went beyond here on that first night. We came in on Saturday, and everybody stayed on this side of the hotel or the area. The hotel, of course, was still standing, and quite a few other buildings. And then on Sunday morning, we went out in caravan, and the trail was not difficult as it is today. And we caravanned all the way out to almost to Highway 89, and the road actually at that time went through Miller Meadow. It's been diverted around the meadow since. But anyway, there was an antique fire truck there with a jazz band on it, and they were playing jazz music and passing out a lunch. Then we moved on to Highway 89, where the Highway Patrol was waiting, and they escorted us to Harris for the final dinner. And it was like a parade on Highway 89, lined with people waving, and it was just a real ball. Today, there's too many of us and too much other traffic. That just isn't going to happen. We can't get everybody out in time to do that.
About how many participants were in the early days?
I believe the first trip was around 60, 65 vehicles. It grew from there. The third one that I was on, I believe was close to 100. And then it grew from there. Any other questions? Okay.
Do you know how many are here today? How many are in this?
150 the first one.
150 on the first one? Thank you, Danny. And then how about the third one?
I don't have my book. I just skimmed through it the day before yesterday. Okay, the 40th year, if you ever run across one of them, okay, about mid-section, it'll give the amount of people went every year for 40 years. And that, I just happened to look at that one.
How many Jeeps are at this activity here, though? How many Jeeps have come through here in the last couple days?
Or this week?
Total people that signed up.
There'll probably be, okay, counting our people, there'll probably be about 750. Okay, tonight, there'll probably be very close to 1,500 people. There's 1,200 of you people and 400 of the workers. It takes about that many.
400 workers. Great job.
Did everybody hear Danny's comments? Anyway, there's about what do you say, 750 vehicles here now, and they'll feed around 1,600 tonight for dinner. I was talking to Bobby Sweeney a little earlier, and he thought it would. Well, let's say he said they brought in 1,800 steaks.
We're not going to run out.
And the steaks, we had a sample of them a week ago, and they are excellent. Okay, another good story that I need to cover is the first motor vehicle to come into Rubicon Springs. It was a 1908 Mitchell in 1908. It was driven by a woman out of San Francisco. The current owner of Rubicon Springs at that time was related to the owner of the Mitchell dealerships in San Jose and San Francisco, or pardon me, San Jose and Oakland. And this trip was documented in a newspaper article, which is reprinted in the book, and it's a great story. But the Mitchell made it. They came from. They came from San Francisco. Of course, they took a ferry across the bay and then drove the roads as such. And one of the major obstacles, which was harder for them than getting in here, was getting to Sacramento, because of all of the water conditions, the flood areas, so much sand, and they finally got a team of horses to get them out of the sand. But that is a good story in itself. But they did make it into here, and then on the way out, they had to use a block and tackle also. But another key feature of that trip, that old 1908 Mitchell, which is brand new, made it all the way from San Francisco through here, back out, over to Reno, around to Carson City, and back to San Francisco without a mechanical problem. How about some more questions? Yes, sir. Question about the little sluice box. There's pictures in this book that's going around of a group of Studebakers passing through the original little sluice, and it was really a tight sluice box. Over the years, there's been people who, well, hold on just a minute here. It was a rough drive. I've driven through it many times in earlier years, and even in some of the later years. But over the years, Mother Nature and humans have created additional problems in there. Some who didn't think it was rough enough and they had bigger machines, etc., actually pulled rocks off of the wall into the little sluice to make it very difficult, and actually to where only extreme buggies could make it through. And that's the way that particular group of people wanted it. That is not the way this trail should be. It is a trail for everybody that can have a reasonable vehicle, and it will be the little sluice. I believe the county will return to a condition that a reasonable vehicle can pass through. it has been difficult for many years. The Sacramento Jeepers did a cleanup on Spider Lake back in about probably 56 or 7, and we used the bypass and came down over the top and then went back up over that with loaded trailers of trash. So it's been a long time that it's been in bad shape. What was your question again there? Well, mining gold. Yeah. The question is, was there ever any gold in here? None that is known of. It was prospected quite heavily at the time when there was a so-called strike, or a perceived strike in the Squaw Valley area, which turned out to be a salted mine as stock promotion and so forth. But the area has been prospected heavily, and even the archaeologist that's giving his presentation on another area will verify that there's no gold in here. It's not that kind of country. It's too high. Another question.
How long have they been using the helicopters?
A good story. The question is, how long have they been using the helicopter? All right, I would say it was 1960, probably 65, maybe 66. They hadn't used a helicopter at all. The Kaiser Jeep Corporation had invited a bunch of executives of Bank of America to come on the trip, and they provided them brand new vehicles. And in those days, seat belts and roll bars weren't even heard of. But anyway, at Buck Island Lake, I think it's still this way. You cross the dam, make a left, go up over a big rock, and then you make another climb and get up high, and then you make a right steep dive off. Anyway, these Bank of America people, they'd never driven a Jeep before. They didn't have any idea what they were doing. Anyway, this one Jeep that had 3 Bank of America executives in it made that right turn and started that dive, and the driver panicked and bailed out. Anyway, the passenger on the right side kept his cool, and he got his leg over there trying to find the brake, but of course he hit the throttle instead. This Jeep came shooting down off of there and bang into a rock. The guy in the back seat was catapulted just out, and his leg went between 2 rocks, broke his leg off like you'd break a pencil, just hanging from skin. I was managing the Jeep dealership at South Lake Tahoe at the time, and I was right behind that situation, and my service manager and his wife were there also, and she was a nurse, and she had an air splint with her. She got to the guy and got his leg back in position and put the air splint on and saved his leg. But the helicopter comes in when we tried to get a helicopter. The Jamboree, and the only radios we were working with then was CB radio. And we'd been able to contact the helicopter company, but the helicopter company refused to fly until they had personal credit information on the guy that was hurt. The Kaiser Jeep Corporation guaranteed the flight. Jeepers Jamboree guaranteed the flight, but they would not fly till they had personal information. I'm right by this injured guy with my rig, and I'm relaying his personal credit information over CB radio. The whole world was listening. But we finally got it to fly. But it was 2.5 hours before we got a chopper in there. And it was the old bubble-nosed Bell. And he had a stretcher area on the skids, but he was just a single pilot and only one person in anyway, so he had a seat. He recommended to the guy that it would be a much more comfortable flight if he got in the seat instead of laying on the stretcher rack, which he did. But the guy was just in severe pain. He did live, and he kept his leg. There was several lawsuits. I don't know how they came out. But that's the story of how helicopters got started. The Jamboree has always had a helicopter on standby since. That was a very good question. Thank you. Anybody else?
What's the history of the bridge?
What was it before?
Okay. The question is the history of the bridge. All right. In the early days of the use of this road, there was no bridge there. The trail that you call Big Sluice now, which is not Big Sluice really, but it's common vernacular. Before you got to where the bridge is now, you made a switchback to the right and went upriver a ways, and there was a ford. And you crossed the river in the water, and there was some logs laid in there actually. When the water was low, you could actually see the logs. And in the book, there's a picture of a Willis Whippet crossing that ford. In the 20s, I believe the wooden bridge was built in the present location. It was replaced by the steel bridge in 1939. The decking of the bridge is wood, and that has been replaced several times by Jeep clubs and the association and groups. It's scheduled to be redone again. I believe they have the lumber set aside, but they just haven't got the means of getting it in here. But probably within a year that the deck will be redone again. And other times the clubs have worked on the apron of the concrete, and so they've got a plaque in there of the various clubs that have worked on it. Thank you. Yes.
Now that you've mentioned about the helicopter, this is involved in a lot of events myself. What do you do for first aid or EMTs or anything? Do you have a station or on your lease?
We have the Jamboree has doctors in here all the time. In fact, there are two doctors. Huh?
I haven't seen anything where you would have a Red Cross or people.
Well, there are two doctors here all the time.
Oh, okay.
And that's the medical tent right over.
So you have all the equipment on? Because I know we have to go out of our way to get first aid into our events and stuff.
Well, since the Jamboree has had helicopter on standby, the doctors have been able to, anybody that's been injured, they've been able to get them in a condition they could be transported by helicopter. But very often in the injuries, they do call in a medical helicopter. CalStar or even the Highway Patrol comes in here. In fact, the Highway Patrol has said, please call us, we want to get the practice of coming into this kind of place. But just a side note here, if you don't have CalStar's insurance, get it. It's only about $50 a year, and they'll fly you out of here free. So that's an excellent buy. That's not a commercial. It's good advice.
Has the area been logged? Has this been logged?
No, this property has never been logged. The ownership group considered it some years ago. We were getting into some pretty heavy financial trouble trying to get the mortgage paid off, and our revenue was short, and it was Mark Smith actually had it surveyed and timbers cruised to decide what was here, and there's considerable timber here that is marketable, but it would have to be dug by helicopter, which is very expensive. Now, at one time, the market on lumber was good enough that it would have paid us a little to do it, and I was the only one of the owners that voted no on logging. Anyway, we all dug in our pockets a little deeper and kept it going to where we didn't need to log, and I hope we never have to. I'd like to keep it clean.
How many partners are in the Jeepers Jamboree?
I have no idea, but I think the committee, it's a corporation also, and I think the committee's about 6 or 7. The ownership group is entirely different, and there are 16 shares of stock out at this time. There are 3 of the shares represented here at Jamboree. I'm one. Jimmy Martin that runs the mechanics crew is another one, and then the Robertson family, who are camped down in Smuttville, are the 3rd stockholders that are here at this time. Any other questions?
What's your opinion on some of the new maintenance to the trail, bringing in rock? And
Good
what's
question.
your opinion on what level man should keep it?
The question is, what is happening? What is going on with the repairs and maintenance and gravel and so forth that are being put on the trail today? This is in response to a court order. The ones who would like to see us disappear managed to file a complaint with the Water Quality Board and point out where we were polluting the water or eroding the soil, etc., and make a big issue out of it. And in fact, their goal was to get the trail closed and put a gate on it. But fortunately, from the research that was done for the book, it was established that this trail clearly qualified as a 2477, if you know what that is. It's a Senate Bill 2477 was passed way back in the 1800s, which said that any road in the development of the West that was properly declared a public way in a legal way could not be closed. Would be a permanent road. Anyway, the county didn't know that the road qualified, but Rick's research dug this up, and they discovered it in reading the book. They found it in the book, and it so happens that the supervisor that made that motion back in 1887 was the great-grandfather of Jack Sweeney, who's current supervisor. Jack was floating in air when he discovered this. But anyway, get back to the real question. When the county went to meet with the water quality people, the attorneys had been aware of this, and they essentially were able to shut down our opposition about trying to close the road or any of that nature, but of course couldn't overcome the claims of water pollution or erosion problems. Most of these are insignificant, but yet they were made legal, and there's a court order that we have to, the county has to address these issues. And some of them you're going to laugh at down the line. The work that's being done now is primarily water quality and erosion control, which is, we needed some of that. There's no question about it, and it's not going to destroy the trail. The one thing that I feel really bad about, Ellis Creek. You all crossed Ellis Creek coming in. Was there any water flowing in Ellis Creek when you crossed it a couple of days ago? But very little. Okay. The county's going to have to build a major bridge across Ellis Creek. It is stupid, total waste of money, but that's the law. It's just crazy, But anyway.
Tell them how wide it is. Tell them how wide that bridge is.
I think it's 16 feet, isn't it? And it
cost.
I don't remember the cost number, but it's big.
Millions.
Yeah, and it has to be able to carry the heaviest truck. But it won't ever be used to that. But the way the laws are worded, where the money's coming from, and in my opinion, we should have told the feds to keep their money and do something else with it, but I don't have control of that. But to carry that, the rock and erosion control and water quality will carry right on through. The pile of rock that you saw coming into Rubicon Springs, that is intended to fill the hole here right going through main camp. All the mud holes on the other side of as you're approaching Rubicon Springs, I don't think there's enough rock there to do it all yet, but I think they've got another helicopter flight scheduled next month. But that helicopter, that was a a sight in itself. It was a sky crane, if you know, any of you know what that is. That's one of the biggest helicopters, or load-carrying helicopters. It carried 8 yards of rock per flight, and that's about 16 ton, I think. It was quite interesting to watch it happen. They wanted to drop it on our dance floor. They wanted to drop it on the slab down here, and it was my job to handle that. I said, no, this is the only place you're going to drop it, right here. And that's where it is. It's on the right-of-way, on the road, and it's easily bypassed. And it doesn't affect our use of the property. I thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it. And enjoy Rubicon Springs and keep coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy birthday to you.